So Tom, we were talking about the National Railroad Hall of Fame.
Yes.
In Galesburg, and this is an effort, as you know, to call attention to the history and the future of rail and the value today of rail. Can you talk a little bit about why we think this is an important enterprise?
Well, I think it's important to recognize the railroads are an incredibly valuable resource to our economy for the movement of goods and passengers, but primarily goods. It's far and away the most cost-efficient and energy-efficient way to move goods over land. Trains consume about a third less or a fifth less fuel than trucks, depending on whose study you believe. And you can move a ton of freight about 500 miles on 1 gallon of diesel fuel, which I think is pretty incredible. The steel wheel on the steel rail is about the size of a dime, and the rolling resistance, once you get a train going, is very little, and so it doesn't take very much energy to move goods that way. But the railroads have come so far, and they've done so much to develop the country, to help settle different parts of the country, to help encourage movement of goods around the country. It's allowed mines to pop up just about anywhere where railroads could reach them to move their product to markets. The same thing with manufactured goods, with agricultural products. It's one of the reasons that America is so successful in exporting its agricultural products, because we've got cheap transportation to get to the ports, to get goods on ocean-going vessels, to go to the Far East, to go to Europe, to go to the Mediterranean, wherever. So railroads are really the heart of the American economy, and in a way they're almost invisible. They're kind of the wholesalers of transportation, but that's good because it takes millions of trucks off the roads every year. It keeps them off the roads. It keeps our skies cleaner, and the railroads are more efficient than they've ever been before. And so we need to recognize the value of what the railroads provide to our economy and make sure that we continue on a path so they continue to be successful in the years ahead.
The idea of recognizing individuals who have been instrumental in shaping the industry is also one of the things that the Hall of Fame is doing. And you've mentioned, as we've been talking, a number of individuals, but looking back over history of the railroad industry, and whether or not we've happened to have recognized these people in the Hall of Fame, who inspires you when you look at the history of the industry?
One person that comes to mind is John Berriger, who was the president of the Monon Railroad here in Indiana, but he was the president of what we would probably call regional railroads today, but a number of the smaller Class 1s. He wrote a paper right after World War II about modernizing America's railroads. He was a real visionary, and I thought he really added a lot to the discussion about how railroads really need to change to become effective. He gave me I wrote to him when I was in high school for some career advice, and he was good enough to write back and gave me some very good suggestions that I followed, and I got to meet him. And even though I didn't know him well, I considered him a mentor. But John Berriger was certainly a giant, particularly in an era in the 40s and 50s when there were not very many visionaries in the American railroad business. Another person who I admire very much is Al Perlman, who had run the New York Central Railroad, one of the biggest railroads in the East, and it was a victim of overregulation, of feather bedding, of a lot of other issues. But he had put a lot of emphasis into marketing the New York Central. He went to the Western Pacific, where I was fortunate enough to work for him, and he injected a whole new culture of marketing into the railroad business, which had been largely unknown before them. So those are the two people in particular I would single out. And then Harry Bruce, who we talked about earlier, who really saved the Illinois Central by shutting off so much of its unproductive lines, improved its motive power fleet, improved its rolling stock, made a lot of investments in the railroad, but he was a brilliant marketer and probably is really underappreciated in later generations in the railroad world.